He was a rising star with nothing but a motorcycle to his name, until his sister collapsed in his arms. Faced with a choice no brother should make, Keanu Reeves made a silent sacrifice. But what happened years later, when a stranger appeared with a replica of that very bike, will leave you in tears. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The road curved along the mountain like a ribbon of memory, silent and wide under a silver sky. Keanu Reeves eased his bike to the shoulder and cut the engine. The hum of the engine faded into stillness, leaving only the whisper of wind through pine trees. He removed his helmet slowly, as though the moment demanded reverence, and stared at the horizon. Distant snowcaps glowing with the first kiss of morning light. There was peace here, but it wasn't the peace that came easy. It was the kind earned, the kind carried. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded photo, creased and weathered. A younger Keanu, barely in his 20s, grinning beside his sister Kim. Her arm was around his shoulder, cheeks flushed with health, joy in her eyes. The smile faded from his face as he turned his eyes toward the rising sun. The past was never far, and today it came in like a wave. It started in the mid-1990s. He remembered the sterile scent of disinfectant in the hospital hallway. It clung to his clothes and seeped into his mind. The floor tiles were white, the lights too bright, and the faces of passing nurses blurred with the rush of panic flooding his chest. He didn't want to believe the call. He didn't want to be here, but Kim was, and she needed him. He found her in a small room, sitting on a padded bench by the window, a thin hospital gown barely shielding her from the chill. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose braid, and though she tried to look composed, her eyes betrayed her. There was fear there, hidden behind a weak smile. "Hey, stranger," she said as he walked in. He tried to smile back, tried to keep the tremble out of his voice. "Hey, Kimmy." They didn't hug right away. They just sat in silence for a few seconds. Then Keanu sank into the seat beside her and took her hand. A knock at the door broke the stillness. A doctor entered, mid-50s, glasses perched low on his nose, holding a clipboard he didn't need. He wasn't reading anything on it. He was organizing his words. You could see it in the way his jaw shifted, the way he drew in breath. "Mr. Reeves," he began, then turned to Kim. "Miss Reeves. I won't sugarcoat it. The tests are conclusive. It's leukemia. Acute lymphoblastic." The room seemed to shrink. Keanu's hand tightened on Kim. "There's a treatment path," the doctor continued, "but it's aggressive. Chemotherapy, radiation, a potential bone marrow transplant down the line. It has to start quickly. Time is not your friend." Kim blinked. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Keanu leaned in closer, protective. "How much?" he asked. The doctor hesitated. "The initial phase alone can run into tens of thousands. Over the next few months, you're looking at well over 6 figures. Insurance may help, but there will be out-of-pocket costs. It's not just the procedures. It's the meds, the scans, follow-ups, hospital stays." Keanu nodded once, jaw tight. "We'll do it." The doctor looked between the siblings. "I'll leave you two to talk." As the door closed behind him, Kim looked at her brother. "Keanu, you don't have to." "I'll take care of you," he said firmly, voice low but certain. "I promise." She tried to speak again, but he just pulled her close. She rested her head on his shoulder, her body trembling slightly as silent tears began to fall. He stayed in that hospital room for hours that night, until the world outside had gone dark and the machines hummed their quiet lullaby. When Kim finally drifted into a restless sleep, Keanu walked the hospital halls in solitude, mind racing with what-ifs and hows. He was still a working actor, but he wasn't rich, not yet. He was building a career, picking up roles, trying to stay afloat in a city that chewed people up. And while some thought of him as rising, his bank account didn't reflect it. But he had something that meant the world to him. His motorcycle. A 1973 Norton Commando 850. He'd rebuilt it himself, piece by piece. That bike had carried him across LA, through endless auditions, been there through heartbreaks and victories, roared beneath him on nights when he had nothing but freedom to offer the sky. It was his only true possession of value, and it was about to save a life. The next day, Keanu made a call to a private collector he'd met years ago, someone who had once offered to buy the bike. The man still wanted it. "How much?" Keanu asked. "30,000, came the answer. Keanu exhaled. Done. He didn't even haggle. Later that evening, he wheeled the motorcycle down the driveway of the small house he was renting, hands lingering on the handlebars for a moment longer than necessary. The collector's driver loaded it into a covered truck, and Keanu stood at the curb as the tailgate shut with a final metallic clang. That sound stayed with him. But that night, when he returned to the hospital and handed over the first check to the billing department, he felt something stronger than loss. Resolve. Kim was worth every sacrifice. And this was only the beginning. Back on the mountain, present day, Keanu stood with the wind tugging at his coat. His fingers grazed the photo once more before he tucked it safely back inside his jacket. From a distance, the faint hum of an engine reached his ears. Not his, something else. A vehicle climbing the road toward him. He turned, squinting against the light. A vintage Norton Commando was rolling up the hill, restored to perfection, and on it sat a rider in a courier jacket, a parcel strapped to his back. As he pulled up and stopped beside Keanu, he reached back, removed the package, and handed it to him with a nod. "For you, sir," the courier said. "From someone named Kim." Keanu blinked. The courier tipped his head and rode off without another word. He stood alone again, holding the box. The past was about to open again, and this time it carried something more powerful than sacrifice. Gratitude. Los Angeles, 1994. The city buzzed outside with car horns and neon signs, but inside the cramped apartment where Keanu slept, silence reigned. His mattress lay directly on the floor, tucked in the corner beneath a cracked window that let in more cold than light. The walls were bare, except for one photo taped above the mattress. A younger Kim, smiling wide, holding up a birthday cupcake with a single candle. Keanu stirred awake before the sun rose. There was no alarm clock, just habit. His shoes were by the door, laces already knotted for speed. He moved like a man whose every second mattered. Because it did. He delivered food from a tiny diner in Venice Beach to help pay for hospital bills. The tips weren't great, but it bought Kim's anti-nausea meds that week. In between deliveries, he read scripts, usually ones that didn't cast him. The few jobs he got were scattered, a voiceover here, a background role there. It wasn't glamorous, it was survival. At night, he took a bus straight from the restaurant to the hospital. Kim was still weak from her last chemo session. Her hair was beginning to fall out in uneven tufts, but when he entered the room, she always smiled. One night, Keanu brought a handheld cassette player and a worn copy of Charlotte's Web. Kim looked at him, eyes dull with fatigue. "You're not seriously going to read to me like I'm 10, she teased. He grinned. "No, I'm reading to you like you're my sister, and because you read to me when I couldn't sleep for a week after watching Jaws." That got a soft laugh from her. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and listened. His voice was quiet but steady. When she drifted off, Keanu didn't leave. He stayed by her bed, hand wrapped gently around hers. Machines beeped in a steady rhythm. Outside, nurses moved like ghosts down the hallway. On the rare nights he didn't sleep in a hospital chair, he crashed on a friend's couch. Sometimes he skipped meals, not because he forgot, but because the money could go to something Kim needed more. One morning, Keanu stepped into the hospital bathroom and looked at himself. Hollow cheeks, tired eyes. His fingers brushed through his long, tangled hair. When he returned to Kim's room, his head was shaved clean. She blinked. "Oh my God, what did you do?" "Solidarity," he said. "And maybe it's time I stopped hiding behind it." Kim laughed so hard she coughed. "You look like a monk." "Good," he replied, "because I'm praying for you." And yet, even with all the work and sacrifice, the hospital invoices kept coming. Every week brought new lab fees, blood transfusion costs, outpatient meds. It was like trying to bail water from a sinking boat with a paper cup. One night, Keanu came home, opened the drawer beneath his mattress, and stared at a small folder. Inside were photos of him and a black motorcycle. His first, his favorite, his freedom. He closed the drawer with a quiet breath, knowing what he had to do. The motorcycle wasn't just metal and chrome. It was memory. He and Tommy, his closest friend from those early struggling days, had built it piece by piece in a dusty garage behind a row of dilapidated bungalows near East Hollywood. It had taken them 2 years, scraping together parts from salvage yards, eBay listings, and a few generous donations from bikers who saw something in Keanu's obsession. The finished product wasn't flashy, but it was his. Matte black frame, brushed steel tank with a hand-painted phoenix on the side. Keanu called it Ashbourne not because it looked dangerous, but because it had risen from nothing. Just like him. That bike had carried him out to the desert on nights he couldn't sleep. It had ferried him along the Pacific Coast Highway when he needed to feel wind in his face more than he needed to eat. It had been his escape, his confession booth, his temple. But now it was just a thing, and things could be replaced. People couldn't. Keanu stood in front of Tommy's garage the next day, holding a folded envelope. His fingers hesitated on the door handle. He knew what he was about to say, and he already hated it. Tommy opened the door, grease on his hands, a smile on his face. "You look like a monk who hasn't slept in 2 weeks." "Close," Keanu said. "I'm a monk who hasn't slept in 3... Tommy's smile faded. "What's going on?" Keanu didn't speak right away. He walked over to the back corner where the motorcycle was stored beneath a tarp. He pulled it off gently, like unveiling something sacred. The light hit the tank, and the phoenix shimmered faintly in the sun. "I need to sell it," he said finally. Tommy's reaction was immediate and fierce. "No, no way. You said you'd never..." "She needs the treatment, Tommy," Keanu interrupted. His voice was calm, but there was something final in it. "You can't be serious. This bike is... You built this from scratch. You are this bike." Keanu looked at him, eyes glassy but steady. "I can't ride freedom if my sister's dying in a hospital bed." Tommy sighed and leaned back against the wall. "You know I could spot you." "I know, and you already have. This is something I can do." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence settled like dust in the garage. Finally, Tommy nodded. "I'll make a few calls." Keanu placed the envelope on the workbench. Inside were photos, documents, specs. Everything a serious buyer would want. Everything a brother was willing to give up. That night, as he left the garage, he didn't look back. He didn't have to. The bike wasn't just behind him, it was part of him now. Just like Kim. And some sacrifices, he thought, are worth making twice if they bring someone home. The next morning, Keanu stopped by the hospital early. Kim was curled up beneath a wool blanket, IVs connected to her thin arm. She'd lost more weight. Her cheeks were sunken and her skin was pale. But her eyes, when they opened, still lit up when they saw him. "You look tired," she whispered. He smiled softly. "I always do. That's how you know I'm working hard." She gave a weak chuckle. "Did you ever sleep last night?" "Not really," he admitted, sitting beside her. "But I did make a decision." Kim tilted her head slightly. "What kind?" He hesitated. "I'll tell you soon." A few hours later, the call came. Tommy had found a buyer, an anonymous collector who didn't haggle and paid in cash. Keanu met the transport truck behind the garage, watching as they winched the bike onto the flatbed. He stood still, jaw tight, arms crossed. The straps clicked, the tailgate lifted, and the truck rolled away. Gone. The wind picked up a little, blowing dust across the pavement. Keanu didn't move. He stared at the empty space where Ashbourne had sat. Then he turned and walked back toward the hospital. That evening, he sat beside Kim again, holding a white envelope. Inside was enough to cover the next several rounds of treatment. She noticed the envelope. "What's that?" "Nothing," he said, placing it in his jacket. She looked at him, eyes narrowing. "Where's your bike?" He tried to deflect. "Let's talk about you. How are you feeling?" She sat up straighter. "Keanu, where's your bike?" He finally exhaled. "I sold it." Her lips parted. "You what?" He nodded. "It paid for everything, and you're worth more than chrome and wheels." Tears filled her eyes. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he whispered, brushing her hair gently back. "You're the only ride that's ever mattered." Kim broke down crying. He held her, both of them trembling. There were no more words, only the quiet pulse of love between them. Strong, unshakable. And for the first time in weeks, Keanu felt lighter. He'd let go of something he loved, but he hadn't lost a thing. He was gaining something far more precious: her life. The garage was exactly as Keanu remembered. Dimly lit, organized chaos, the scent of engine oil and burnt metal lingering in the air like old stories refusing to fade. Dust motes floated through the shafts of sunlight slicing in through narrow windows. At the center of it all, beneath a flickering, hanging bulb, sat the motorcycle. It wasn't just a bike. It was a monument to a time when Keanu was still finding himself, a relic of sweat, sacrifice, and soul. He stepped forward slowly, every creak of the floor beneath his boots echoing memories. Tommy had once called it the best thing we ever built without a blueprint. The frame was hand-welded. The tank, matte black with silver streaks, was airbrushed by a street artist they met one night outside a diner. The handlebars were customized from a WAR airplane salvage. Everything about it was personal, intense. He reached out and ran his hand along the leather seat, stitched with the symbol of a rising phoenix. His idea. Back then, it had symbolized his escape from a fractured childhood, from grief that clung to his bones. That motorcycle had given him air when he couldn't breathe. Now it just reminded him of her, of Kim. He closed his eyes and the past rushed in like a wave. It was early 1991 and the city buzzed with energy. Keanu had been juggling bit roles in off-Broadway plays and commercials, anything that paid enough to cover ramen and rent. Every spare hour that wasn't spent on set or in auditions was spent in Tommy's garage. They had no money, but they had time, and passion, and calloused hands. Keanu remembered Tommy's voice, playful but serious. "Man, you ride this thing? You better know it'll change you." "I don't want change," Keanu had said back then. "I want freedom." He'd found it. For a while. Until the day the hospital called. Kim had collapsed. The leukemia had worsened. The first treatment failed. The new medication wasn't covered. Time was against them. And freedom came with a price. Back in the present, the sound of a socket wrench clattering to the floor snapped Keanu from his thoughts. Tommy, older now with more gray in his beard, emerged from behind a stack of tires. "Keanu," he said, surprised, "you haven't been here in years." Keanu offered a small smile. Had to see her one more time. Tommy looked over at the motorcycle, then back to Keanu. "She still runs, if that's what you're wondering." But Keanu wasn't here for a joyride. He was here for something much harder. "I need to sell her, Tommy," he said, voice even but heavy. Tommy's smile faltered. "Come again?" "I need you to list the bike. Tonight." Tommy blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. "You're joking." Keanu shook his head. "I wish I was." Tommy dropped the rag in his hand and walked over slowly, the weight of the request settling between them like an anvil. "You want me to sell her?" Tommy asked again, this time with disbelief edging into frustration. "This bike is you, man. You poured your whole soul into her. Remember what you said when we finished? She's the only thing that ever made sense." Keanu exhaled, his eyes fixed on the concrete floor. "And now the only thing that makes sense is my sister making it out of that hospital. I've done the math. I've looked at every option. There's nothing left." Tommy ran a hand over his face, pacing back and forth. "There's got to be another way. Loans? Fans? Hell, call a producer?" "I'm not calling anyone," Keanu cut him off gently but firmly. "Kim's barely keeping it together. She doesn't need to know I'm begging for help, and I won't make her treatment dependent on a maybe. She needs that treatment now." Tommy looked at him, and something in Keanu's face stopped him cold. It was the same look he'd seen when Keanu first came into the garage years ago. Quiet desperation behind calm eyes. Only this time, it wasn't about freedom. It was about love. About sacrifice. "She's worth it," Keanu added quietly. "More than this. More than anything." Tommy sat down on an overturned bucket, rubbing his hands together. "You sure about this?" Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the bike again, crouched beside it, and rested a hand on the frame. "You gave me peace when I had nothing else. But this isn't the kind of peace I need right now. I need to know I did everything I could for her." His voice cracked slightly. "And if this is the cost, then I pay it." Tommy nodded slowly. "All right, I'll list her. But it's gonna hurt." Keanu stood up and offered his hand. "Everything that matters does." They shook, and with that the decision was made. That night, Keanu stayed in the garage while Tommy photographed the bike. Every angle, every detail, the custom gear shifter, the scar along the muffler from that near wreck in 1993, the inscription under the gas cap that read, "Keep riding." They put the listing up online with a heavy heart, no flashy title, just the words, "Custom Keanu Reeves bike, one of a kind, serious buyers only." Within 12 hours, the messages flooded in, collectors, riders, fans. Some offered outrageous amounts just to say they owned something built by Keanu Reeves himself. But Keanu didn't care about the highest bidder. He told Tommy to pick someone who would ride it. "Don't let it collect dust in a museum," he said. "Let it live." Tommy honored the wish. The next morning, the deal was sealed. A man from Oregon sent a wire transfer without negotiation. The tow truck would arrive that afternoon. Keanu didn't sleep. He couldn't. He sat beside the bike in the garage until dawn. As morning light bled through the garage windows, Keanu ran his hand one final time across the fuel tank, fingers tracing the faint scratches like they were old battle scars. Every ride, every storm weathered, every mile of freedom, it was all stored in that metal. But the moment wasn't about loss. It was about love. And in that quiet hour, Keanu made peace with what he had to let go of. Tommy arrived with 2 coffees. He didn't say much, just handed one to Keanu and leaned against the wall, both men watching the bike in silence. When the tow truck pulled into the driveway, gravel crunching beneath its tires, Keanu's chest tightened. The driver stepped out, respectful and quiet, aware he was handling more than just machinery. "Be careful with her," Tommy told the man, his voice tight. Keanu gave a short nod, then turned to walk away, but just before he reached the street, he stopped, turned back, and took a photo. Just one. Of the bike being rolled up onto the truck bed. The chain clinked, the hydraulic lift groaned. And then, it was gone. Back at the hospital, Keanu sat at Kim's bedside. She looked pale but managed a faint smile. "You look tired," she whispered. "I'm fine," he replied, pulling the envelope from his coat pocket. She spotted it immediately. "Is that the bill?" He nodded. "Paid in full." Her eyes widened. "Keanu?" He hesitated, then softly, "I sold the bike." Kim's lips trembled. No, not that bike. You built that. It's part of you." He reached for her hand, You're all of me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You didn't have to." He wiped them gently, the same way he had during those long chemo nights. "You're the only ride that matters." They stayed like that for a while, wrapped in silence and each other's strength. Outside, life kept moving. Horns honked, nurses bustled, machines beeped. But in that small room, something eternal had been traded. Freedom for family, steel for love, solitude for shared hope. And as Kim drifted to sleep, her breath steady and warm, Keanu looked out the window and whispered to no one, "We're going to get through this, no matter what it costs." Because love, true sacrificial love, isn't measured by what we keep, it's measured by what we're willing to give away. The ad went live just before sunset. Tommy uploaded 3 photos, one side profile, one from the front with the light on, and one from behind, showing the hand-etched plate they had welded together. Freedom rides. No price was listed, just a note. Private build, not for collectors, for someone who understands soul. Within 12 hours, 3 inquiries came in. One stood out. No questions, no bargaining, just a simple message. "Name the price. I'll wire it today." Tommy looked at Keanu, hesitant. "Man, this guy's got the money ready. He wants to send a truck tomorrow morning. You sure you want to do this?" Keanu didn't respond right away. He was looking at a photo of Kim taped to the wall in Tommy's office. She was 12 in that shot, holding a wrench and wearing a giant smile, grease streaked across her cheek. She had helped them tighten bolts on the tailpipe that day. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, call him." That night, Keanu barely slept, not because of regret, but because of everything else. The uncertainty, the stakes. Kim had been improving slowly, but the doctors were cautious. The next stage of chemo was aggressive, risky, and the bills were stacked high on his nightstand, threatening to topple over like a house of cards with the next gust of bad news. Morning came heavy and gray. He heard the rumble of the truck before he saw it, industrial, unmarked, and sterile. It backed slowly into Tommy's lot, the kind of cold, efficient machine that didn't care what it carried. Keanu stood beside the bike one last time. He didn't touch it, just looked. Every scratch on the tank told a story. The dent near the gear lever from when he and Tommy had misjudged a turn in the rain. The faded paint near the seat where Kim had once sat for a joyride, laughing so hard they had to pull over. The truck lowered its platform, and 2 workers approached. Tommy stayed quiet, respectful. They strapped the bike down carefully, then wheeled it up the ramp like it was a patient heading into surgery. And just like that, it was gone. Keanu didn't cry, not then. He just stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, as the truck pulled away and disappeared around the corner. Tommy placed a thick envelope in his hand. Cash, just like he promised. Keanu took it without looking. "Thanks." Tommy nodded. "For what it's worth, I know this wasn't just a bike." Keanu looked up at the cloudy sky, his voice low. "No, it wasn't." He didn't say goodbye, just walked off in silence, the envelope growing heavier with every step. The hospital room was dim when Keanu arrived. The sun filtered through the blinds like soft slats of light on the pale floor. Kim was propped up against a mountain of pillows, IVs connected to her arm, her skin a little too pale, but her eyes warm when they found him. "You're late," she teased, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu held up a brown paper bag. "Got your favorite," he said, setting it on the table beside her. "Thai, from that place on Melrose." Her smile widened. "You bribing me into staying awake?" He pulled up the chair, his movements slow. She didn't know it, but the walk from the garage to here felt like crossing a battlefield. His shoulders were heavy, not with exhaustion, but with the cost of what he'd just done. As Kim took a bite, she paused and tilted her head. "Where's your bike?" she asked casually, like she expected it to be parked downstairs. "I didn't hear it." Keanu looked down at his hands, rubbed the grease that still lingered under his nails. He hesitated. "It's at Tommy's," he said at first. Needed a little work. She nodded slowly, chewing, but her eyes stayed locked on his face, reading him the way only a sister could. After a moment, her fork paused mid-air. "You sold it," she said quietly. Not a question, a statement. He sighed. "Kim, why didn't you tell me?" Her voice cracked as she set the fork down. He leaned forward. "Because you've got enough on your plate. Because you shouldn't have to feel guilty that your brother sold something to keep you alive." Tears welled in her eyes. "Keanu, that bike was your dream. You built it. It was your freedom." "No," he said softly. "You are." The words settled into the silence between them like the last note of a song neither of them wanted to end. She looked away, wiping at her face, but the tears kept falling. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. He reached for her hand, holding it tight. "Yes, I did." They sat there, no more words exchanged, just the quiet hum of the machines and the slow, rhythmic beep of her heart monitor. Later that night, after she'd drifted off to sleep, Keanu walked to the hospital's quiet corner lounge. He pulled out the envelope Tommy had given him and unfolded the hospital invoice he'd tucked into his jacket. The numbers were staggering. He counted the bills slowly, methodically, then laid them in neat stacks across the table. He'd made enough to cover the next round of treatment. Barely, but it was enough. For now. He folded the receipt and slipped it into the envelope. Then, for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to breathe. Not because things were fixed, but because, for once, they weren't falling apart. A week passed. Kim's numbers stabilized, small victories. The kind you didn't celebrate with champagne, but with quiet sighs and a little extra sleep. And although her immune system was still fragile, the doctors noticed improvement. Keanu kept showing up, every morning, every night, in between callbacks and deliveries. He never said much about the bike again, but its absence followed him like a ghost. One evening, as the two of them watched the sunset through the narrow hospital window, Kim broke the silence. "Remember when we used to ride out to Lake Hollywood?" she asked softly. "You'd make me wear that ridiculous pink helmet." He smiled. "You hated it?" "I hated how much I loved it," she said, grinning through her fatigue. "I'll get another one someday," Keanu said after a pause. But she shook her head. That one was different. Keanu nodded. "I know." She turned her head to look at him, her voice trembling with emotion. "You always take care of everyone else first, even back when we were kids." He didn't answer, just reached over and gently squeezed her hand. She looked down, blinking fast. "You shouldn't have had to choose." "I didn't," he said, eyes steady. "It was never a choice." And then, in a whisper, he added, "You're the only ride that matters." She broke then, tears spilling, arms reaching. He pulled her into a soft embrace, careful not to disturb the wires or the IVs. Just a brother holding his sister, both clinging to a bond that cancer could threaten, but never destroy. Outside, the city kept moving. But in that moment, inside that hospital room, nothing else mattered. They had each other. And for now, that was everything. The soft humming of machines was the only sound in the dim hospital room. Outside, the sun had long since dipped below the horizon, casting a cool blue shadow across the city skyline. Inside, the sterile air felt heavier than usual. Keanu sat beside Kim's bed, his eyes fixed on the slow drip of her IV. He hadn't spoken in over an hour. He didn't need to. Her breathing had changed. The doctors had warned them about this. Leukemia wasn't a straightforward battle. It came in waves, some more violent than others. Kim's immune system had finally reached its breaking point. The chemo had been relentless. She was exhausted, her once vibrant eyes now glassy and sunken. Her skin looked translucent under the hospital lights, and her fingers, once warm and playful, lay cold and still on the sheets. Keanu had seen her get sick before, nausea, fatigue, weakness, but this time was different. This was the first time her body stopped fighting back. The nurse had quietly informed him earlier that her fever had spiked. Her white blood cell count had plummeted. Infections were already showing signs. The next 48 hours would be critical. Keanu stood up and walked out of the room, fists clenched. The hallway was empty. His boots echoed against the tile floor as he walked, faster with each step, until he burst through the double doors and into the parking lot. He didn't stop. He just kept walking, aimlessly, until he found himself standing in the middle of an empty intersection 3 blocks from the hospital. And then it happened. His knees buckled. He dropped to the asphalt, palms scraping the road, and screamed. It wasn't a sound of anger. It wasn't even grief. It was raw despair, primal, broken, unfiltered. A man known for his quiet strength had finally shattered, and the darkness swallowed the sound like it had been waiting. The city around him didn't flinch. No one came running. No one called out. The world just kept turning. He didn't know how long he stayed there, but eventually he heard footsteps. Light, careful. "Mr. Reeves?" a voice said gently. He turned his head and saw Evelyn, one of the night shift nurses. She was in her mid-40s, eyes lined with fatigue and compassion. She knelt beside him, ignoring the rough asphalt against her scrubs. "I've seen that look before," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "My brother had leukemia. We couldn't afford the treatment. I worked double shifts, sold my car, begged friends for help, but we lost him anyway." Keanu's breath caught. Bolt didn't have anyone to sit with him through the pain. "But your sister does," she continued. "She's lucky to have you. You being there? That's not small. That's everything." Tears welled in Keanu's eyes, and for once, he didn't hold them back. Keanu sat on the edge of the sidewalk now, Evelyn beside him, her words still echoing in his chest. The cold asphalt had scraped his hands, and the sting grounded him more than he realized. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was heavy, full of things that didn't need saying. "I thought I could handle it," Keanu finally murmured, voice hoarse. "Thought I could carry it all." Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are, but even the strongest arms break when they never get to rest." He stared down at his palms, bruised and trembling. "She's the only family I have left." "Then she's not alone," Evelyn said softly. Keanu nodded, slowly, as if the truth needed time to sink in. Then he stood up, brushed the gravel from his jeans, and thanked her. Not with words, just a look, one of quiet gratitude only someone who'd been to the edge could understand. Back inside the hospital, the night grew still. He slipped back into Kim's room, sat in the same chair by her side, and picked up the book she'd loved as a child, The Little Prince. Her favorite. She stirred slightly, her hand twitching against the sheets. "You become responsible, forever, for what you have tamed," he read aloud, voice cracking. He watched her chest rise and fall, shallow but steady, and continued reading until his voice turned to a whisper and his eyes finally closed. From that night on, he never missed another. Auditions, gigs, phone calls. None of it mattered. Kim was his world, and if it meant sleeping in a stiff plastic chair night after night, so be it. He became her shadow, her guardian. When the nurses changed IV bags, he stood by. When doctors came in with updates, he listened with military precision. He kept track of her medications, her nutrition, even the way her breathing changed when she was in pain. He refused to let anything slip past him. Not again. One night, the monitor let out a warning beep. He was at her side in an instant. A nurse rushed in and made adjustments. Kim had stopped responding to one of the antibiotics. Her fever was climbing again. Keanu stood motionless, watching, his fists clenched, but he didn't yell. He didn't scream this time. He closed his eyes and breathed. "I'm here," he whispered to Kim, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I'm not going anywhere." The nurse glanced at him, clearly moved. She didn't speak, but her expression said enough. Most people cracked long before this point. But not Keanu. He wasn't just holding on for Kim. He was becoming her anchor. The next morning, Kim stirred. Barely, but her lips parted just enough for one word. "Hi." That tiny hi was the loudest sound Keanu had heard in days. It cracked through the fog of fear that had hung over the hospital room like a storm cloud. His breath caught. He leaned in, brushing her hand with his fingers. "You scared me," he whispered with a shaky smile. "Don't ever do that again." Kim blinked slowly, her skin pale, but her spirit flickering beneath the surface. "Sorry," she managed. "Was tired." Keanu nodded, tears silently falling. "I know. But you're still here. That's what matters." Evelyn entered quietly, checking Kim's vitals, offering a knowing glance to Keanu. She gave a slight nod, her way of saying things were turning, slowly but surely. In the days that followed, Keanu became more than a brother. He became her caregiver, advocate, and emotional lifeline. He learned how to adjust the bed controls so she could rest more comfortably. He memorized every med schedule. When her appetite returned, he snuck in her favorite broth in a thermos, gently spooning it into her mouth as she smiled faintly with each bite. Even when she was too weak to speak, she would squeeze his hand twice, their secret code for thank you. Every little improvement felt like a miracle. A single laugh from Kim lit up the whole floor. Nurses whispered in hallways about the devotion they'd never seen before from any brother, let alone a struggling actor, barely scraping by. One night, Keanu sat by the window in Kim's room, looking out at the glowing city lights. He had a small notebook in his hand, scribbling notes, dreams, bits of dialogue, hopes for the future. He paused, then wrote in bold letters, "No matter what happens, I will never leave her side." His fingers trembled as he underlined it twice. The next morning, the doctor came in. He looked tired, but this time there was a hopeful glint in his eye. "Her numbers are improving," he said, slowly, but significantly. Keanu didn't speak. He just nodded, a breath catching in his throat. His hand gripped the edge of Kim's blanket like a lifeline. "She's got a long road ahead," the doctor added, "but this is the first good sign we've had in weeks." Keanu looked at Kim. Her eyes fluttered open again, and this time, her smile was just a little bigger. He leaned in, voice low but filled with new strength. "We're getting through this, one breath at a time." And from that moment on, he didn't just carry the burden. He became her hope. The spring sunlight filtered gently through the hospital blinds, casting soft golden rays across Kim's pale face. Her features had grown more gaunt over the months, her cheeks sunken, her eyes dulled by the toll of relentless treatment. But that morning, something had changed. The doctors entered the room quietly, their faces unreadable at first. Keanu sat in his usual place, on the uncomfortable vinyl chair beside Kim's bed, hands folded, heart pounding, with the quiet hope he dared not speak aloud. Dr. Phelps finally spoke. "The new treatment, it's working. Her white blood cell count is up." Keanu blinked. "It's working?" "It's early," she warned, "but the indicators are strong. The risk of infection is still there, but we may have turned a corner." Kim's lips trembled, and a tear slipped down her cheek. Keanu leaned forward, clutching her hand. Neither of them said a word at first. The silence carried more weight than any celebration. From that day forward, the visits felt different. Hope, once just a flickering ember, had begun to glow. Kim's voice returned with more energy. She laughed, weakly at first, but enough to light the room. Keanu brought books again, but now she stayed awake for more than a paragraph. Their shared silences were no longer drenched in fear, but slowly shifting toward recovery. Meanwhile, outside the walls of that hospital room, Keanu's own world was beginning to transform. He'd landed a supporting role in an indie film. Nothing glamorous, nothing cushy, but it was something, a foot in the door. The director liked his quiet intensity, said it brought authenticity to the role. Keanu didn't care about reviews or praise. He thought only of hospital bills and medication costs, of how far this check might stretch. When the movie wrapped, another opportunity came, a larger role, a studio gig. Slowly the dots began to connect. And, for the first time in years, Keanu didn't have to choose between bus fare and dinner. But none of that changed his rhythm. As soon as a paycheck arrived, it went directly to Kim's care. He lived simply, refused the frills. While others celebrated wrap parties or red carpet appearances, Keanu rode the bus in a hoodie, carrying homemade soup to his sister. Fame tiptoed around him, but he never let it catch up. Not yet, not while Kim needed him. Then, one afternoon, an envelope arrived at the hospital. It was addressed to Keanu, no return address. Inside was a simple note. Thought you'd want to see where she ended up. Folded beneath was a glossy photograph. There it was, his old motorcycle. Shiny, immaculate, preserved under gallery lights in an ornate showroom. It sat like a centerpiece at an upscale auction house in France, surrounded by polished marble floors and velvet ropes. A placard labeled it Custom American Build, Anonymous Celebrity Donation. Keanu stared at it for a long time. Tommy must have tracked it down and sent the photo. Keanu hadn't asked, hadn't even wondered where it went, really. Not since the night it disappeared down the driveway, tail lights glowing like a final goodbye. Kim noticed the envelope in his lap. "What's that?" she asked softly. He handed her the photo. She smiled. "She looks fancy now." "She deserves it," Keanu murmured. Kim tilted her head. "You're not going to ask for it back?" He shook his head. "Nah, it's not mine anymore." Kim narrowed her eyes, trying to read his face. "You miss her, though." "Sometimes," he admitted. "But what I got instead? It's better." He touched her hand, gently. And in that moment, both knew this wasn't just about a bike. It was about everything it represented. What he'd traded for her life, and why he'd never regret it. Keanu leaned back in the chair, hands behind his head, eyes closed. But not from exhaustion this time. For once, he was letting himself feel something different. Gratitude. Kim was improving, and though the road ahead was still long and fragile, they were walking it together. The doctors called it a slow remission, but Keanu didn't care about the labels. All he saw was color returning to her cheeks and laughter resurfacing between quiet moments. One night, as she slept, he walked to the hospital roof. He carried with him a small notebook. Inside, scrawled in uneven penmanship, were notes to himself. Half poems, scattered thoughts, mantras to stay sane. He opened to a fresh page and wrote, "You can't hold on to everything, but you hold on to who you are. When you let go for the right reasons." The wind stirred gently and he felt a strange peace. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't afraid of tomorrow. A week later, he got a call from his agent. "Keabu, they want you for a lead, action film. Not a huge budget, but real potential. You're at the top of the list." He hesitated. "Filming starts in 2 weeks, out of town." He glanced at Kim, who was coloring in a small sketchbook. IV still in her arm, but smile easy and full. "I'll do it," he said, "but only if I can fly back every weekend." There was a long pause on the other end. "That might be hard." Keanu didn't flinch. "Then find something else." He hung up. A few hours later, the agent called back. "They'll make it work. You're in." It was a turning point. Keanu would shoot during the week, then catch red-guy flights home to be by Kim's side for her weekend treatments. He became a ghost in both worlds. On set, precise and silent. At the hospital, warm and present. And all the while, the roles kept growing. Studios started noticing. Articles began appearing. Who's the quiet actor with the intense eyes? But Keanu dodged interviews, dodged premieres. He didn't want the world's spotlight. He wanted to pay off one more round of chemo, one more specialist. He wanted to be there when Kim's hair started growing back. And he was. One morning, she stood in front of the mirror, holding a fuzzy beanie in her hand. "Look," she said, pointing to the crown of her head. "Little rebels?" Tufts of dark hair had begun to sprout, soft and determined. Keanu grinned. "You're going to have cooler hair than me in no time." She smirked. "I already do." By then, the hospital staff all knew Keanu, not as a movie star, but as a brother. Nurses brought him coffee without asking. Janitors shared updates if they saw Kim laugh. Evelyn, the nurse who once found him sobbing in a hallway, gave him a small stitched angel. "She's turning the corner," she said. And she was. Keanu stopped sleeping in waiting rooms. He moved into a tiny rental nearby, still humble, still sparse, but with a warm blanket folded on the couch just in case Kim visited. He bought her a small easel and paints. "Use it when you're strong enough," he said. She did. Her first painting was of a winding road. At the center, a motorcycle faded into the horizon, and in the distance, two people stood holding hands, one tall, one thin, both facing sunrise. He looked at it for a long time, then whispered, "You remember." "I never forgot," she replied. The days after Kim's white cell count began to stabilize felt like breathing air again for the first time, not quite a full breath, but enough to feel alive. Keanu had fallen into a rhythm of hope, cautious but present. There was no cheering in the hospital hallways, no dramatic recovery overnight, but there was a look in Kim's eyes. Less gray, more light, and that was enough. They started a quiet tradition, something small and intimate, born out of the emotional exhaustion. After one of her chemo sessions, Kim handed him a folded piece of paper. On the outside, it just said, "Checkpoint 1." Inside, in her crooked, wobbly handwriting, she wrote, "Today I only threw up twice, that's an improvement. Also, I made the nurse laugh when I said Keanu Reeves brings me soup in sweatpants. Don't worry, I didn't out your secret identity." Keanu laughed so hard he had to step out of the room. When he came back, eyes still misty, she handed him another folded note, blank on the outside, inside. "P.S. If I don't make it, remember this. Your love already saved me." That one hit harder than any diagnosis ever had. From then on, after every treatment cycle, Kim would write another letter. She called them her postcards from the war. They were sometimes one paragraph, sometimes 3 pages long. Sometimes they were silly, a ranking of which Jell-O flavor tasted least like sadness. Sometimes they were philosophical. Why do ceilings in hospitals always look like checkerboards? Are we supposed to feel like pawns? Each letter carried a little of her soul, her fear, her humor, her grit. Keanu kept every one of them in an old red shoebox, taped shut with a sticker that read, "Do not open unless you've forgotten how to smile." But one letter nearly broke him. It came after a blood transfusion had gone wrong. Her body had rejected the new cells, and she'd gone into a mild seizure. Keanu had stayed up for 39 hours, watching over her, refusing to blink too long. When she finally came to, her face was pale as frost, lips barely moving. A week later, when she could sit up again, she handed him another letter, quietly, wordlessly. This one was different. It read, "If I don't get out of here, don't stop being you. You are my lighthouse. You've already kept me from drowning more times than I can count. If I go, I'll still be holding your hand. Always." Keanu walked to the hospital roof that night and cried into the wind. The letter stayed in his back pocket for weeks. Creased, smudged at the corners, the ink faded from the times he unfolded it to read again in silence. Every time he held it, he felt her presence more vividly than ever. Kim didn't just write to survive, she wrote to connect, to fight back against the sterile walls of IV bags and oncology monitors. Her words gave color to days that otherwise looked gray. They helped Keanu breathe when all he wanted to do was hold it in until the fear passed. One morning, just before dawn, Keanu came in to find her propped up with pillows, scribbling something furiously. "You're not supposed to be writing," he said gently. "Your blood pressure." "I'm writing, you dingus," she said, flashing a weak smile. He laughed through tired eyes and pulled a chair beside her. That letter was different, again. Short but weighty. "Today I dreamed we were on the coast. You had that stupid leather jacket. I had hair. You looked out at the ocean and said, 'I never learned to surf, but I can ride anything else.' Then I laughed so hard I woke up choking on my own breath. Good dream, though. Thanks for being in it. Keanu didn't say anything for a while. He just nodded, folded the letter, and added it to the shoebox. It wasn't long before others noticed what was happening between the two siblings. Nurses began asking Kim if they could read her checkpoint notes. Some even asked her to write one for them. Patients nearby, most of them just as sick, began slipping their own jokes or doodles under her door. What began as a lifeline between brother and sister quietly became a ripple of hope through that ward. One day, a janitor named Luis left a small sketch taped outside her room, a cartoon of Keanu holding a spoon with the words, "Superman Soup Service, now with extra ginger." Everyone laughed. Even the most serious doctor cracked a smile. But even with the laughter, the fight remained brutal. There were nights Keanu didn't know if she'd make it to morning. Times when her breathing slowed so much, he'd sit by her bed with one hand gently resting on her chest, just to feel movement. When it stopped, even for a moment, his heart would seize. And still, the letters came. Checkpoint 8 simply said, "Still here, still writing, not done yet." Each one was a small miracle, a spark, a refusal to be erased. It was near the end of her second year of treatment when Keanu came into her room and found her sitting upright, stronger than he'd seen her in months. Her hair had just begun to grow back, a soft fuzz beneath the cap she wore, and her skin held a faint glow. She was holding another letter. This time she handed it to him before he could sit. He opened it slowly. The paper trembled in his hands. "If I don't make it," it read, "remember, your love already saved me." There were no jokes this time, no doodles, just that single line in her careful handwriting. At the bottom, she'd drawn a tiny heart. Inside it, the words, "Always your sister." Keanu didn't cry right away. He sat still for a long time, the letter resting in his lap. Then he leaned forward, gently pressed his forehead to hers, and whispered, "I won't let you go." That night, her white blood cell count stabilized. Against all odds, her numbers held. And the next morning, for the first time in over a year, she walked the hospital hallway on her own. Slowly, holding on to Keanu's arm, but walking nonetheless. Everyone on that floor, doctors, nurses, janitors, applauded. Kim bowed dramatically, smiling at her brother. "Checkpoint 9, she whispered. Keanu laughed, tears finally streaming down his face. That shoebox of letters stayed with him long after she left the hospital. Years would pass, fame would rise, but those pages, crinkled, tear-stained, joy-filled, remained his greatest treasure. Because in those pages, he didn't just see a sister's struggle. He saw her strength, her humor, her defiance. He saw the reason he kept fighting, and the unshakable proof that love, expressed in small paper hearts and whispered dreams, could be stronger than any disease. The morning sun streamed through the hospital blinds, warm and golden, like it had finally remembered how to shine after weeks of gray. Kim sat up slowly, her skin still pale, but her eyes alive with a brightness Keanu hadn't seen in months. The doctor's voice cracked as he reread the test results. "She's in remission," he whispered. Disbelief etched into every syllable. Keanu didn't speak. He just dropped into the nearest chair, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for a year. His hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from release. Kim looked over at him, a weak smile tugging at her lips. "Told you I'd win," she said. The hallway echoed with slow, reverent steps as Keanu walked out of her room and into the corridor. Nurses he knew by name, faces he saw every day, each gave him a look. Equal parts awe and joy. Evelyn hugged him. "This doesn't happen often," she whispered. "You fought this with her." Keanu nodded, unable to speak. A week later, he packed a rental car with snacks, water, and a worn-out road map. Not a motorcycle this time, just something safe, quiet, dependable. He opened the passenger door for Kim, who who wore a scarf over her head and sunglasses far too big for her small face. "Where are we going?" she asked, smiling. "Everywhere we said we would," Keanu replied. They drove through the desert, past quiet plains and into the mountains, places they'd once talked about as kids growing up in Toronto, places they'd circled in magazines they couldn't afford to buy. They took turns picking destinations: an old ghost town, a stargazing site in Utah, a hidden waterfall in Oregon. At every stop, Keanu watched her eyes soak in the world like she was seeing it for the first time. Every diner they stopped at, she ordered fries and a milkshake. Every photo she took, she laughed first. One night, just as the sky turned indigo over a stretch of California coastline, they pulled into a small roadside diner nestled between cypress trees. Kim looked at him and said, "Wait here." She returned a few minutes later carrying something wrapped in brown paper. "For you," she said, placing it in his hands. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a small hardcover book, the kind you'd find in a second-hand store. But when he opened it, he found something else entirely. Every letter she had written him, every milestone, every moment of fear, every flicker of hope, was printed neatly on the pages. Doodles filled the margins. At the end of each letter, she had written, "Still here." He stopped at the last one. Her handwriting looked shakier, but the words hit like thunder. "If I didn't make it, just know, your love already saved me." Keanu didn't cry often, but on that night, under the canopy of stars, he wept like a child. They spent the night at a small coastal inn, the kind with creaky floors and ocean air that seeped through the walls. Kim slept soundly for the first time in months. Keanu sat outside on the porch swing, the letter book resting on his lap, thumbing through its pages again and again. The sun rose slowly, bathing the world in soft gold. Kim joined him, wrapped in a blanket, 2 steaming mugs of coffee in hand. "You didn't sleep," she said gently. He smiled. "Didn't need to. I've never felt more awake." The next stretch of the road trip took them to Yosemite, a place they had seen only in postcards as kids. Kim insisted on hiking. Slowly, carefully, with Keanu holding her elbow every step of the way. When they reached a lookout point, she turned to him and said, "You saved me twice. Once with medicine, once with memories." Later that evening, as they roasted marshmallows over a fire pit at a campsite tucked beneath redwoods, Kim looked up at the stars and whispered, "I never thought I'd see these again." Keanu didn't answer with words. He simply pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and placed the letter book next to her sleeping bag. That night, as the fire cracked low and the sky became a blanket of constellations, he realized something had shifted. This wasn't just survival. This was life. Reborn, fragile, but beautiful. The next day, they crossed into Arizona, where they visited an old roadside motel that had once doubled as a film set. Keanu remembered watching movies in that exact spot during a lonely night before his first big audition. Kim snapped a photo of him standing in front of the faded neon sign. "Smile," she said. "You look like someone who just started over." The trip became a time capsule. Every moment was sacred. They collected napkins from diners, wrote notes on postcards they never mailed, and made recordings of their favorite laughs and stories. In one town, a local mechanic spotted Keanu and struck up a conversation. When he learned who he was, he said, "You're the guy who gave up a legendary bike for your sister, aren't you?" Keanu paused. "How did you know that?" "Rumors gone around," the man said. "Guy like you, they don't forget." Keanu chuckled, surprised. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was the only choice. The man nodded, then handed him a small silver keychain shaped like a motorcycle. "Keep that. You might need it again." Kim grinned as Keanu slipped it into his pocket. "See, the world hasn't forgotten you." Keanu looked at her then, not as someone who had been through hell, but as someone who had pulled them both out of it. Her spirit, once dimmed by disease, now shone with unstoppable light. They drove on, winding through desert highways and mountain passes, never rushing, always soaking in the stillness between the miles. In Santa Fe, they visited an old mission chapel where Kim lit a candle, not for herself, but for the families they had seen in the hospital, those still fighting, still waiting. Keanu stood beside her in silence, humbled by her grace. Her illness had taught them both to look at the world differently, not through the lens of fear or loss, but of sacred presence. Every breath mattered. Every sunrise was a gift. One morning, while stopping at a peaceful overlook in Colorado, Kim handed Keanu a folded page from the back of her letter book. "This one, I wasn't sure if I'd ever give it to you." He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was shakier than the others. "If you're reading this, it means I made it. It means the worst is behind us. I want you to know that no matter where your road leads, I'll always be the girl on the back of your bike, arms around your waist, hair in the wind. You gave me the ride of a lifetime, big brother. And I'm not done riding with you yet." Keanu folded the letter and pressed it to his heart, eyes glistening with quiet emotion. No applause, no cameras, no red carpet, just the road, the sky, and the unbreakable bond between two souls who had weathered the darkest storm together. Back home, after the road trip ended, Kim's remission was confirmed by the doctors. No more transfusions, no more treatments for now, just checkups and cautious optimism. To celebrate, Keanu and Kim hosted a small backyard dinner with a few close friends, including Tommy, who brought with him a surprise. A miniature model of Keanu's old motorcycle, perfectly replicated down to the scratches on the tank. "Had it made for you," Tommy said, handing it over. "Thought you should have something to remember that chapter." Keanu smiled, holding the tiny bike in his palm. "I don't need it to remember," he said softly, glancing at Kim across the table, laughing in the warm light of recovery. "I've got her." As night fell and laughter filled the air, the journey they had endured faded gently into memory, not forgotten, but transformed into something beautiful. Not just survival, redemption, hope. A reminder that sometimes the greatest rides in life have nothing to do with engines or wheels, but with love that refuses to break. Years had passed since those hospital nights, since the long, quiet car rides and the letters passed between brother and sister like fragile treasure. Keanu's life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. From indie flicks to box office hits, he'd risen not just as an actor, but as someone audiences looked to for something deeper: kindness, sincerity, strength without arrogance. But behind every scene, behind every interview and applause, lived a memory. The years when his world narrowed to a single hospital room and the soft grip of his sister's hand. It was on the set of a low-budget indie film, one he'd signed on to purely for its message about resilience and healing, when it happened. The crew was breaking for lunch. Keanu, never one for on-set drama or ego, walked alone to the edge of the lot, sipping coffee from a paper cup, when a young man in his mid-20s, wiry and wide-eyed, approached slowly. "Mr. Reeves?" the man asked, almost reverently. Keanu looked up with a nod and a gentle smile. "Yeah, my name's Charlie," he said. I hope this isn't weird. I've worked as a lighting assistant here, and I didn't want to bother you, but I've been waiting for the right moment." Keanu tilted his head, curious but calm. "Go ahead." Charlie reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn photograph. It showed a sleek black motorcycle, matte finish, minimalist body, unmistakable craftsmanship. "Do you remember a bike like this, a custom Norton, sold back in '94, I think?" Keanu's face changed, not dramatically, but his eyes, something in them flickered. Recognition mixed with something quieter. A bruise that had healed, but never fully disappeared. "I do," Keanu said softly, stepping closer to the photo. "I built that with my buddy Tommy, sold it during a tough time." Charlie nodded. "My dad bought it. He didn't know the backstory until much later. I grew up hearing about this beautiful motorcycle he never rode. Said it was haunted in a good way. After he passed, I started looking into its history, found out who originally owned it. Who you are." what it meant. Keanu's grip on the coffee cup tightened just slightly. Charlie continued, voice shaking now. I couldn't let it just sit. I restored it. Not exactly the same, it's not fully original anymore, but I tried to bring it back as close as I could. I think it belongs to you. The words hung there like fog after rain. Keanu stared at the photograph again, now holding it in his hands. The lines of the bike, sharp, lean, intentional, carried more than design. They carried memory, not just of the machine, but of the man he'd been when he gave it up, of why he gave it up. He looked up at Charlie, his voice quieter now. You restored it? Charlie nodded. Took me 3 years. Tracked down parts from all over, called up old mechanics, found out about Tommy. He's the one who confirmed it was your build, told me what it meant to you. Keanu exhaled slowly. I didn't think I'd ever see it again. I didn't want to assume, Charlie said quickly, but when I learned the story about your sister, I knew it wasn't just a motorcycle. It was sacrifice, and it deserved to come full circle. Keanu smiled, but it was one of those smiles wrapped in emotion too big for words. She's doing okay now, stronger than ever. Charlie's eyes lit up. I'm glad, really glad. A long pause stretched between them. Not awkward, just filled with everything that didn't need saying. Keanu finally extended a hand, and Charlie shook it firmly. Where is it now? Keanu asked. Charlie grinned. It's here, in my trailer. I drove it across the country just in case you said yes. Keanu blinked, almost incredulous. You brought it all the way here? Charlie shrugged, a little bashful. Figured it was worth the miles. They walked across the lot together, two silhouettes against the sunburnt sky. Behind a small white trailer, parked and covered under a thick canvas sheet, the shape of the past waited. Charlie peeled it back gently. There it was. The same low-slung frame, the same matte black tank, the grips worn in just the right places. But something about it had changed too. It looked reborn, not like a relic, but like a tribute. Keanu crouched down beside it, running a hand along the seat, the leather aged but intact. His fingertips brushed the initials carved subtly beneath the gas cap. K plus T. He smiled again. This time, it broke through. She's still beautiful, he said. Charlie nodded, like she never left. Keanu stood, his hand lingering on the handlebar. You didn't just fix a bike, you brought back a memory I thought I'd lost. Later that night, when filming wrapped, Keanu stayed behind on the lot. The bike sat just a few feet away, bathed in soft moonlight. He straddled it slowly, not to ride, but to feel. He turned the key. The engine purred to life. Same soul, new heartbeat. He closed his eyes. And in that moment he wasn't Keanu Reeves, the actor. He was just a brother. A kid who once slept on couches, shaved his head to make his sister laugh, and sold his freedom on 2 wheels to buy her another shot at life. The bike wasn't just his anymore. It was part of their story. As the rumble faded into the night, Keanu whispered, "Thank you, Charlie." Sometimes the past finds its way home, not because we chase it, but because someone else believes it matters. And in this case, it came back on 2 wheels, carrying memories worth more than gold. The early morning sky was brushed with hues of gold and rose as Keanu rolled down a quiet neighborhood street on the bike he never thought he'd see again. The familiar rumble beneath him wasn't just mechanical. It was emotional, reverberating through his bones like the echo of an old dream suddenly reborn. The restored Norton wasn't exactly the same. The seat was redone, the tank bore a new coat of black paint, and a few pieces gleamed like they'd never aged a day. But beneath all that, Keanu recognized the curves, the slight scratches on the handlebars, and the signature hum that only this bike had. The same one he'd sold in silence under flickering garage lights to save Kim's life. Now, it had come back. As he turned into the driveway of Kim's cozy home, He noticed the window curtain shift. She'd seen him. He parked slowly and pulled off his helmet. A breeze drifted through the trees, carrying the scent of morning dew and fresh-cut grass. The garage door creaked open, and there she stood. Kim. Healthy, vibrant, her hair full again, her smile soft with recognition and disbelief. She stepped forward cautiously, eyes fixed on the bike. "Is it?" she asked, her voice cracking. Keanu nodded, his own voice caught in his throat. It came back to us. Tears welled in her eyes as she reached out and touched the handlebar. Her fingers trembled over the cold metal, as if afraid it might vanish. She looked up at him. How? Keanu leaned back against the side of the garage and let the moment breathe. His eyes held a glint of quiet gratitude, the kind that comes from something deeper than words. "There was this fan," he finally said. "Charlie. He came up to me on set one day, asked if I remembered a black Norton from the 90s. Kim blinked, stunned. "You remembered it after all this time?" He gave a soft chuckle. "Of course I did. I never forgot. I just learned to live without it." He told her the rest. How Charlie's father had bought the bike years ago, how the man had cherished it, then passed it on to his son, who eventually learned where the bike came from, and how, after learning the story of Kim's battle and Keanu's sacrifice, Charlie spent months restoring it. Not just out of respect, but because he believed the bike belonged back in the hands of the man who gave it up for love. Kim shook her head in disbelief. "People are amazing sometimes." "They are," Keanu said. "And sometimes, things that are lost, they find their way back when you least expect them." She ran her fingers along the tank again. "It's beautiful." He nodded. "But it's not the bike that matters. It's what it meant to us. Back then, it was freedom. Now, it's a reminder of what we survived." Kim disappeared inside for a moment and came back with a photo album. She flipped through pages worn from time and love until she reached the one she was looking for. A picture of two teenagers standing next to the original bike. Kim had a scarf wrapped around her head, bald from chemo, and Keanu had a buzz cut to match. Despite the pain, both had smiled in the photo. "We took this right after your first treatment," he said softly. She nodded. "I remember. You said we were warriors." They recreated the photo that morning. Kim set up a camera with a timer, just like old times. She stood beside the bike, leaned slightly into her brother, and grinned with all the warmth and strength that years of survival had gifted her. The camera clicked. The new photo joined the old one. Kim turned to the final page in the album. It was blank, waiting. She slid the fresh print into the sleeve and wrote underneath, in looping cursive, "The ride that saved my life." She closed the album slowly, pressing her hand against the cover as if holding onto the memory just a moment longer. Then she looked at Keanu and smiled through misty eyes. "You didn't just save my life, you gave it meaning. You gave me a future." Keanu put his arm around her shoulders. "No," he said, "we gave each other one." And outside, in the fading afternoon light, the restored bike gleamed, silent, powerful, eternal, just like the bond between them. The sun was just beginning to rise over the quiet city as Keanu stood outside a modest brick building tucked between a coffee shop and an old bookstore. It didn't look like much from the street, but to him, it was everything. The sign hadn't been unveiled yet. It was still hidden beneath a white canvas sheet held in place with simple rope ties, but inside, the place was humming with quiet energy. He took a deep breath and turned the key in the door. The lock clicked open, and the scent of leather, oil, and fresh paint greeted him like an old friend. The space was warm and industrial, filled with vintage motorcycle parts, gleaming custom builds, and framed photos along the wall, some old, some new, but every single one had a story. At the heart of it all was a single word painted on the back wall in bold black script: resilience. This was K+K Customs, a dream he'd carried in silence for years, not just a shop, but a mission. Inside, Tommy was already tinkering with a half-built chopper. "You're early," he said without looking up, a smirk in his voice. "So are you," Keanu replied. From the back room, Evelyn emerged carrying a tray of coffee cups. She had traded her nurse scrubs for a soft brown jacket with the K+K logo stitched on the sleeve. "Don't let the grease fool you," she said with a smile. "Tommy was in here before dawn." Just then, Charlie rolled in on the original restored Norton, the same bike Keanu had sold all those years ago to help pay for Kim's treatment. Now it sat like royalty at the front of the showroom, polished and dignified. "She still purrs like a dream," Charlie said, patting the seat. Keanu smiled, placing a hand gently on the tank. "She brought us full circle." The idea for the shop had started quietly. After Kim's recovery and years of gratitude from both of them, Keanu began to think about how many families couldn't afford what they had fought so hard to overcome. How many kids were in hospitals with no brother reading to them at night, no custom bike to sell, no means to make the impossible possible. He envisioned something more than a garage, something living. A hybrid space that would serve motorcycle enthusiasts while donating profits to families battling terminal illness. Rides for awareness, auctions for care, therapy events that brought the joy of the road to those who needed escape the most. But he kept it quiet, as always. He wanted it to mean something, not just be seen. The soft rumble of approaching cars signaled that the guests had started to arrive. Keanu turned toward the door but didn't move. He just watched as families stepped out of vehicles, some holding hands, others pushing wheelchairs, some with kids wearing hats over their chemo-treated heads. It was a quiet procession, not a media event or a red carpet spectacle, just people, survivors, fight. Kim arrived last. She stepped out of a silver sedan, wearing a light scarf over her shoulders and sunglasses, even though the sun hadn't fully risen yet. Her hair had grown back now, silver streaks mingled with dark waves, but her smile hadn't changed. She walked up to Keanu and linked her arm through his. "You ready?" she asked softly. Keanu nodded once. "Yeah, let's open the doors." He stepped forward, untied the ropes holding the white cloth, and pulled it down in one swift motion. The name gleamed in bold, brushed chrome lettering above the glass. K+K Customs. Riding toward hope. There was a beat of silence, then the sound of applause, not loud but sincere. Keanu didn't give a speech right away. He walked through the crowd, shaking hands, listening to short stories about lost siblings, tough nights, the weight of waiting rooms. When he finally stood beneath the sign, he looked out at the people, not fans, but family, in a way only those who've walked through fire can understand. "I don't know what makes someone a hero," Keanu said, voice steady but low, "but I know what made my sister one." He turned toward Kim. She fought with everything she had, and she smiled through it. And I learned that the road ahead doesn't always look like the one we hoped for, but we can ride it anyway. He gestured behind him toward the shop. "This place isn't about motorcycles, not really. It's about movement, about getting through pain, about building something when everything feels like it's falling apart." A woman in the crowd, holding her son close, wiped a tear. Another man clapped slowly. The moment was raw, but whole. Tommy stepped forward and handed Keanu a helmet, custom painted in midnight blue with silver lettering that read, "Kim's co-pilot." He handed Kim one too, in soft pearl white. She laughed as she read hers, "Keanu's mechanic." "We thought you two should take the first ride," Evelyn said, her voice catching slightly. Keanu looked at Kim. "Want to see if I still remember how to lean into the curves?" She grinned. "Only if you promise not to stall." He rolled the Norton out from the showroom, careful and reverent. They both got on, Kim behind him, holding tight like they used to when they were kids borrowing their uncle's dirt bike on dusty Canadian back roads. He revved the engine once, then again. The shop doors rolled open, and they rode into the rising sun. As they disappeared down the road, the crowd stayed silent for a moment longer, then burst into applause. Not for a celebrity, but for something greater. a brother, a sister, a bond built in hardship, strengthened through sacrifice and celebrated not with headlines, but with healing. Inside the shop, a plaque on the wall caught the morning light. It read, "For every mile we thought we couldn't go, we went together." And the engines, once silenced by pain, roared on for hope. The house was quiet now. Outside, the wind whispered across the open Montana plains, rustling the wild grass in soft waves. Moonlight spilled through the window of Keanu's study, painting silver streaks across the wooden floor. The restored motorcycle, once thought lost forever, sat in the corner near the bookshelves, gleaming silently under the soft glow of the desk lamp. Keanu sat at his writing desk, a blank journal open before him. His pen hovered for a moment, then touched the paper. The words came, slowly at first. April 12th. April 12th. Kim is asleep upstairs. The house feels full, yet still, like peace decided to stop by and stay the night. He paused, glancing toward the stairs as if he could hear her breathing through the walls. There had been so many nights when sleep was uncertain, when machines beeped and nurses bustled in and out of sterile hospital rooms. Now it was just them again. Like it used to be, before the diagnosis, before the long battle. He wrote more. "Sometimes I think about those years we lost to illness, all the plans we had to push aside, the birthdays spent in clinics, the holidays that passed in quiet rooms. But I also remember every laugh we found between the pain, every inside joke, every time she squeezed my hand, just to say she was still here." The pen scratched against the page, his thoughts steady, unfiltered. "I remember the weight of her body in my arms when she was too weak to walk. The night I sold the bike. I didn't cry then, but I wanted to. I didn't know it would come back. I just knew I couldn't lose her." He looked over at the motorcycle again. It was almost poetic. The machine that had once represented freedom now stood as a monument to sacrifice, to family, to love. From upstairs, he heard the faint creak of floorboards. Kim was turning in her sleep. He smiled faintly. He reached for a worn envelope in his drawer, one of Kim's letters. Her handwriting was unmistakable, a little messy but full of life. He unfolded it carefully and began to read. "Dear Kay, I don't know if I'll ever get to write you a final letter, so maybe this one will do. I want you to know something. You were my cure long before medicine caught up. You were my hope, my laughter, my strength when I had none. You didn't just keep me alive, you gave me a reason to live. Love always, Kay." The words hit him harder than he expected. He'd read it before, dozens of times, but tonight, something about it caught deeper. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the moonlight. Maybe it was just that he finally felt like it was safe to feel it all. Tears welled in his eyes, not from pain, but from overwhelming gratitude. He placed the letter down and stared out the window for a moment. He whispered, "Thank you, Kim." Keanu leaned back in his chair, eyes closed for a moment. He listened, not just to the quiet house, but to the echo of years past. The hum of fluorescent hospital lights, the sharp sting of chemo medicine in the air, Kim's laughter as she cracked jokes even in her weakest moments. It all blended together now like scenes from a movie he could never forget. He looked at the second page in his journal and started writing again. "There were times I didn't think we'd make it. Not because I didn't believe in her, but because I saw what the disease was doing to her. She'd smile at me, even when she couldn't hold down food. She'd crack jokes when her body was too weak to sit up straight. She was the brave one. I just followed her lead." He scribbled a line and tapped his pen thoughtfully. The wind outside had picked up slightly, brushing against the windows like a lullaby. The curtains swayed gently, and the moonlight shifted across the floor. He rose from the desk and walked slowly over to the motorcycle. Resting his hand on the leather seat, he whispered, "You were just a machine, but you became something else. A trade. A symbol. A choice I'd make again in a heartbeat. Then, after a pause, he added, "But it's good to see you again." The bike didn't answer, of course, but somehow it felt like it acknowledged him. Like it knew the role it had played in a story far bigger than roads and engines. Keanu turned back to the desk, flipped to a fresh page, and began writing again. I learned something in all those long nights by her side. When you love someone that deeply, there's nothing you won't give up. No dream, no possession, not even your peace. And yet, that's how you find it again. Not by chasing it, but by giving it away. The house creaked gently as the old wood settled. The warmth of the room contrasted with the cool outside air drifting in through the open window. Keanu looked at the framed photo of them both. Young, hopeful, smiling beside the original bike before it was ever sold. That version of them had no idea what was coming. And now, they were still standing, still laughing, still riding in their own way. He glanced once more at Kim's letter, smoothed it down, and placed it beside the journal like a closing chapter. "Tomorrow," he wrote, "we ride again." Keanu pushed the chair back softly and stood, walking quietly toward the hallway. He paused at the base of the stairs, looking up. The light under Kim's door was off, but he knew she was there, resting peacefully, her breathing slow and steady, safe in the home they'd rebuilt with resilience and love. He smiled, his chest heavy with gratitude. He walked outside, letting the night air greet him. The moon hung high, silver and solemn. The motorcycle gleamed under its light, almost as if it, too, were reflecting. Not just light, but memory, sacrifice, return. Keanu sat on the porch step and let silence settle in. No camera crews, no red carpets, no scripts. Just the truth. The raw, beating heart of what really mattered. A shooting star arced across the sky. He whispered softly, "Thank you." It wasn't clear if it was to the universe, to fate, or to Kim. Maybe all three. He rose, took one last glance at the sky, and stepped inside. He didn't turn off the porch light. He left it on. Just in case, tomorrow, someone else needed to find their way home. And then he whispered to the night, "We made it." The studio lights dimmed just slightly as the camera zoomed in. Keanu sat calmly across from the interviewer, a steaming mug of tea in his hand, his posture relaxed but composed. The room held a respectful silence, the kind that comes not from awe, but from something deeper. Reverence. The host smiled gently. "You've told stories about your film roles, your travels, your philosophies. But if you don't mind me asking something a bit more personal," he leaned forward. "What's the one thing you gave up that you'll never regret?" The question lingered in the air for a beat longer than expected. Keanu didn't flinch. He looked down at the table, his fingers resting lightly on the handle of the mug. A breath, a half smile, and then, softly, "My bike." The audience was still. Some looked confused. This was Keanu Reeves, Hollywood's most iconic motorcycle enthusiast. His love for bikes was no secret. But then, he continued, "Not just any bike. It was a custom-built Norton. I sold it in '94, during a time when I didn't know how I'd pay for my sister's leukemia treatment." You could hear the air shift in the room. The crowd exhaled together. The host didn't interrupt. No one dared. "I loved that motorcycle. I built it with my friend Tommy from scratch. Every curve, every wire, it was my freedom. After everything we went through as kids, that bike felt like the only thing I truly owned in this world." He looked directly into the camera now, not with pride, not with regret, but with peace. But Kim needed treatment, and love is heavier than metal, so I let it go. A few audience members wiped their eyes. The camera panned to the host, who looked stunned, yet deeply moved. Keanu leaned back, eyes far away now, like he was looking down the long road behind him. "She once told me, during chemo, 'You didn't just fight cancer with me, You sat in the fire and didn't leave." That stuck with me. He chuckled quietly. "We always talk about winning battles, don't we? Box office wins, social wins, victories in life. But sometimes, just showing up is the real victory. Sometimes just being there, quietly, steadily, painfully, is the greatest act of courage." The audience broke into soft applause. Not loud, not explosive, just enough to say, "We felt that." Keanu gave a polite nod, then paused again. "Kim wrote me a letter once that I still carry. It said, 'You were my cure before medicine caught up.' I don't think I've ever received a better review in my life." The applause faded gently, replaced by silence, the kind that asked for more, not because of curiosity, but because of reverence. The host leaned forward. "Do you still carry that letter?" Keanu reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. From it, he pulled a thin, folded piece of paper, edges worn soft from time and travel. He didn't open it. Didn't need to. "I laminated it after it started falling apart," he said with a faint smile. "Carried it in every jacket, every trip, every roll. It reminded me what matters." The host nodded, visibly moved. "And Kim? How is she doing now?" Keanu's eyes lit up with something warmer than pride, something closer to awe. "She's a force. She's running a foundation now, K+K Customs, bikes and hope stitched together. We help families with terminal illness find moments of freedom, rides through the desert, donations, letters. We give them what we needed. Just one breath of peace when the world's on fire." Gasps rippled through the audience. The story had already touched millions, but this was legacy. "And you kept the bike?" He nodded. "It found its way back to me. A young man named Charlie tracked it down, restored it, and gave it back. Told me he'd grown up hearing the story. Said it helped him understand what real strength looks like." The host blinked back tears. "It's funny," Keanu continued, "how something you give up to save a life can come back and carry even more meaning. The bike was never just chrome and rubber. It was a chapter, a bond, a beginning." The camera panned to the audience. One woman clutched her chest. A man held his child a little tighter. People weren't watching an interview anymore. They were witnessing a confession, a memory, a miracle. Then came the final question. If you could say one thing to someone out there, someone sitting beside a hospital bed, wondering if they'll have enough strength, what would it be? Keanu paused, looking out past the studio lights, as if he could see through the lens to someone actually sitting in that very place. "I'd tell them this: you're not weak for being tired. You're not broken for feeling afraid. But you are stronger than you know, because you stayed. You stayed when it hurt. You stayed when it cost you everything. And that is enough." A full silence followed. Then, as if on cue, the audience stood, not for fame, not for celebrity, but for the raw, unfiltered truth he had just offered the world. That clip would later go viral. Shared across social media, it was reposted with captions like, "This made me cry at work," and "This is what real strength looks like." It wasn't the bike, it wasn't the fame, it wasn't the studio lights or the applause. It was the reminder that love, quiet, patient, sacrificial love, leaves the deepest legacy. And in that moment, a man known for action films became something even more powerful. A brother, a guardian, a living example of what it means to stand by someone when they need you most. The soft glow of string lights swayed in the evening breeze as guests gathered in the backyard for Kim's birthday celebration. It wasn't just any birthday. This was the year the doctors had once said she'd never see. And now here she was, standing tall, laughing, surrounded by old friends, hospital nurses, family, and even strangers who had become part of her story. A long wooden table stretched under the stars, lined with candles and framed photos from her journey, Snapshots of her and Keanu, chemo days, recovery hikes, and that iconic shot with the returned motorcycle. Every photo told a chapter. As the night matured, a hush naturally settled over the crowd. Tommy, wearing his familiar grease-stained cap, stepped up to the small stage built by volunteers. Before we cut the cake, he said, "Kim has something to say." Well, not in person, but in words. He held up a letter, sealed in a cream-colored envelope with delicate script. Keanu's name was written on it. Kim nodded from her seat, a tissue already in her hand. "I asked Keanu to read this for me," she said, voice soft, cracking a little. "I wrote it when I thought I wouldn't make it. But it still feels right today." Keanu stood slowly. The silence was thick with emotion. He took the envelope with gentle fingers, eyes meeting hers before he turned to face the crowd. He unfolded the paper. "Dear Keanu," he began, voice steady but already edged with emotion. "This letter was meant to be read in case I didn't make it, but now that I'm here, I think it means even more." He paused, cleared his throat, continued. "You gave up something for me that no one else ever would. Your motorcycle was never just metal and wheels. It was your symbol, your freedom, your escape. And you sold it so I could live." Keanu glanced up briefly, tears already forming in a few guests' eyes. He went on. "You never made me feel like a burden, not once. Even when I knew the treatments were draining you, even when you were down to your last dollar. You gave me laughter when I had nothing to smile about. You gave me haircuts when mine fell out. And when I wanted to give up, you held my hand and simply said, 'We ride this out together.'" A soft gasp rippled through the crowd. Keanu paused, eyes wet now, but he pressed forward. "Most people measure love by what you give, but you taught me it's about what you're willing to lose, without bitterness, without applause. You didn't just save my life, you gave me a life worth living." He looked toward Kim again. She was crying openly now, but smiling. Keanu took a moment to breathe. The letter trembled slightly in his hands, not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of love poured into every word. He looked back down and continued, voice quieter now, as if letting the words settle deep into the hearts of everyone listening. "You were the one constant in every hospital room. You were the one I looked for when the pain was too much. You were the only one who never flinched, never wavered. You saw me when I was sick and still believed in who I could be." A woman in the crowd softly dabbed her eyes. Tommy folded his arms tightly across his chest, jaw clenched. Evelyn, now retired but still carrying the spirit of a nurse, took Kim's hand from across the table and squeezed it. Keanu's voice thickened, but he didn't stop. "There were nights I thought I wouldn't wake up and I'd hear your voice reading some random book, or telling me a ridiculous story to distract me. You sat through every test, every procedure, every terrifying scan, like time didn't exist when I was hurting. That's what saved me." He paused again, folding the paper slightly at the crease as he glanced around the gathering. The firelight reflected off his eyes, giving them a soft glow. "They say medicine heals the body," he read, "but love, that heals the soul." The crowd stayed absolutely still. You could hear nothing but the hum of the wind threading through the trees. Keanu took a final breath and read the last lines. "You sold your freedom, but gave me mine. So when people ask me how I survived, I won't talk about doctors, or hospitals, or prescriptions. I'll say, because my brother wouldn't let me go. I love you, always. Kim." The silence held. Not awkward, not uncertain, just reverent. Then someone sniffled, then another, and then thunderous applause, not loud in volume but heavy in meaning. It was the kind of applause that comes from hearts that have been touched, from people who feel like they just witnessed something sacred. Keanu folded the letter slowly, held it to his chest, and stepped down from the platform. Kim stood as he approached, and they met in the center of the grass, wrapping each other in an embrace so tight and genuine that even the stars seemed to pause. That moment, more than any film premiere or red carpet walk, defined him. Not as an actor, not as a celebrity, but as a brother. The morning sun spilled golden light across the hills outside Los Angeles, bathing the two-lane road in a soft glow. The air was crisp, clean, filled with the scent of pine and the faint echo of birds calling from the distance. The kind of morning that made everything feel possible. Keanu tightened the strap of his helmet and gave Kim a small smile as she settled into the sidecar. It had been custom-built just for her, sleek, lightweight, painted in the same deep black as the bike itself. A silver phoenix feather stretched across the side, a symbol of rebirth she had once doodled in her journal during chemo. Now it gleamed under the sunlight like a badge of survival. He revved the engine. It purred, not quite the same as the old bike, but close. Close enough that his chest ached in a good way. The replica had been rebuilt with love, care, and memory. Every screw reminded him of a night in the hospital. Every mirror reflected moments of fear, faith, and finally, peace. Kim looked up at him, eyes already sparkling with joy. "Ready?" Keanu grinned. "Let's ride." The motorcycle roared gently as they pulled out from the driveway, tires crunching over gravel, then gliding smooth onto the road. Kim's scarf fluttered in the wind. She held on to the sidebar lightly, her other hand resting on her lap. There was no fear in her eyes, only freedom. It had taken years to get here, not just physically, but emotionally. Years of hospital rooms, late-night breakdowns, silent prayers, and early morning recoveries. But now, in this quiet, rolling stretch of road framed by golden grass and tall trees, all that weight seemed to lift. They passed wildflower patches on the hillsides. Children waved from a hiking trail. An old man at a farm gate tipped his hat as they rode by. Keanu wasn't in costume, wasn't playing a role. There were no cameras, no red carpets, no scripts. Just him, his sister, and the road stretching endlessly in front of them. Kim laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like ages. It echoed through the sidecar and reached Keanu's ears like music. He looked at her and nodded, like he wanted to say, this is why we made it through. As the road curved along a ridge overlooking the valley, Keanu eased off the throttle. The pace slowed to a quiet roll, the wind now a gentle hush rather than a roar. They had no destination. That was the beauty of it. The sun crept higher in the sky, casting shadows that danced across the pavement. Kim closed her eyes and tilted her head back, letting the breeze wash over her face. Her hand rose, fingers slicing softly through the air like she was flying. For a brief second, Keanu glanced over and saw her exactly as she used to be. Before the hospitals, before the fear. Just his sister, carefree and radiant. They stopped at a scenic overlook with a wide view of the valley below. Keanu kicked the stand down, climbed off, and helped Kim out of the sidecar. She stretched her arms overhead and let out a long, happy sigh. "This view," she whispered. "I used to dream about things like this when I was stuck in that hospital bed." Keanu handed her a small canteen of water. "You dreamed us into it." They sat on a bench nearby, the bike behind them, framed by the sprawling mountains. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. They didn't need to. The silence between them was full of memories, gratitude. Kim turned to him, her eyes misting. "Do you ever think about how close we came to losing all this?" Keanu didn't look away. "Every day. But I think about what we didn't lose even more." She smiled at that. "Like your hair," she teased, bumping him lightly with her shoulder. He chuckled. "Hey, I rocked that buzz cut." "You did, but I loved that you did it for me." Keanu looked back at the bike, the sun glinting off the chrome details. "I'd have shaved off everything I had if it meant keeping you alive." "I know," Kim said softly. "You already did." Another long pause, the kind that says more than words ever could. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily in the sky. The world felt suspended, like this moment was immune to time. Just them, this overlook, and the road waiting to carry them forward. Kim stood up and walked slowly back to the bike. She ran her hand along the frame, touching the etched initials near the engine. K. She looked back at Keanu, her voice steady but emotional. "Let's finish this ride." He joined her, his hand resting over hers on the tank. "Yeah, let's bring it home." They rode the last stretch in silence, the hum of the engine a steady heartbeat beneath them. Trees blurred into streaks of green and gold as the sun began to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows across the winding road. From above, a drone captured the image. Keanu on the restored bike, Kim nestled in the sidecar, her scarf fluttering in the wind like a flag of quiet victory. Their laughter, faint but clear, echoed through the canyon as they turned onto the final road home. It was more than just a ride. It was a full-circle moment, a story of pain, love, sacrifice, and renewal. Because life, they had both learned, isn't about what you lose, but what you choose to carry with you. And they carried each other. The morning sky was painted in soft orange and blue, the kind of quiet color that only comes after a storm has passed. Keanu Reeves walked slowly, one hand resting on the handlebar of the restored motorcycle, gently guiding it up the narrow ridge trail behind his property. The wheels crunched against the gravel. Dew clung to the grass around him, shimmering like stars that had chosen to stay a little longer on Earth. At the top, he stopped. The valley below was still wrapped in sleep. Fog hung low over the trees. The town, the roads, even the memories, all seemed quieter in that golden silence. Keanu sat down on a flat boulder near the edge of the ridge, the bike resting beside him like a loyal friend. He looked out across the horizon and took a deep breath, the kind that fills your chest with both gratitude and ache. He pulled a small journal from his coat pocket, the same one he'd carried since Kim's diagnosis all those years ago. The pages were frayed now, some stained by rain, others by tears. Inside were her letters, his reflections, and pieces of the journey they had survived together. He opened to a blank page. His pen moved, slowly at first, then, with quiet certainty, he began to write. Some sacrifices never come back, and maybe they're not meant to. A bike, a dream, a part of yourself. You let them go so someone else can stay. But the love behind those sacrifices, that's the part that never leaves. It echoes forever. Kim was never my burden, she was my reason, my compass. The one reminder I needed that even when the road is hard, it's worth riding for someone you love. I sold a piece of freedom once, and in doing so, I bought time. Time to hold her hand. Time to make her laugh. Time to say things most people don't get a second chance to say. And now, that freedom came back to me. But it's changed. It's deeper. It's rooted in something bigger than horsepower and open highways. He paused, letting the wind flip a few pages backward, landing on one of Kim's old letters taped into the binding. It read, "You always thought the bike was your therapy, but it was you, Keanu. It was your love, your loyalty. You're the reason I healed. You gave up something you loved to save someone you loved more." Keanu smiled gently, the kind of smile you only see on people who've lived through deep things and come out softer, not harder. He stood up, brushing off his jeans, and looked into the camera. This was an incredible story, his voice calm, steady, filled with emotion. But it's also a true one, and I'm not the only one with a story like this. He rested his hand on the bike's leather seat, glancing toward the sunrise again. If you've ever made a sacrifice for someone you love, something quiet, something no one else may have seen, know that it mattered. It still echoes, just like mine does. He nodded once, then looked directly into the lens. If you believe in the power of family, in the strength of sacrifice, and in the kind of love that doesn't need to shout to be heard, share this incredible story, because maybe someone out there needs to be reminded that what they gave up was never wasted. He smiled again. And if you believe that strength isn't always loud, and sometimes the softest moments carry the loudest truths, hit subscribe. There are more incredible stories to tell. The screen slowly faded to black, but not before one last line appeared in soft white letters. Have you ever given something away to save someone you love? Tell us in the comments. Your story might help someone else find hope. The wind picked up gently, and somewhere behind the ridge, the sound of birds waking filled the air. And in the quiet that followed, Keanu stood still, man, brother, writer, carrying more than just memories. He carried love.